Morning. We are so excited to have Heather Price here with us today. Dr. Price leads the Climate Justice Project and is a chemistry faculty member at North Seattle College. Heather earned her PhD in chemistry, building atmospheric chemistry instrumentation that she used from aircraft and mountaintop research sites to measure and study the photochemistry of air pollution transported across the Pacific from Asia to the West Coast. Heather is also a climate scientist. She conducted her postdoctoral research with the program on climate change at University of Washington, where she incorporated the chemistry of hydrogen and deuterium into a global chemical transport model of the atmosphere called geoschem, collaborating with research groups at and Harvard. Heather has been teaching courses on chemistry, climate change, and environmental issues since 1999 and attended the climate negotiations of COP6 as a student participant in 2000. Dr. Price, also a climate justice activist and co-founder of TalkClimate.org, a community hub of climate scientists, educators, medical and mental health professionals, artists, climate activists, and youth who created and curate resources to help people have empowering conversations and take climate action that's rooted in equity and justice. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it off to Dr. Price.
Thank you so much, Katie, for that introduction. And welcome to my talk, Climate Justice Integrated Learning. And I'm going to give you an overview of the North Seattle College's Climate Justice Project and how we've brought that through both STEM and humanities. And so let me go ahead and let's see. So I'll start with a land acknowledgement. So on behalf of North Seattle College, we acknowledge that we occupy the traditional ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Duwamish tribe, a people who are still here, continuing to honor and bring to light their ancient heritage. Without them, we would not have access to this gathering, dialogue, and learning space. We ask that we take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here. And I encourage you to look up whose land you are on, or if you're one of the original caretakers. Thank you. So next. So I'm pretty active on social media, and this is a tweet shown on the left that follows my life in carbon dioxide from 326 parts per million when I was born to we're at what 415 when I posted this in May of 2019. And we've already reached 420 parts per million this year, by the way. And this, along with my dress, so my dress illustrates the urgency of the climate crisis and also how climate connects with media, art, science, and fashion. So my dress shows the global average temperatures from about 1850 at my shoulder to 2019 at my knee. And my friend is wearing the data for France. The red part of my dress, these are the lives of most of our students. So anyone that's younger than about 44 has never known a colder than average year in their lives. And many of our students, they already understand that the climate crisis is rooted in racial and socioeconomic inequality and injustice, and their education, it needs to be relevant to these issues. So learning just the climate science in classes, it's not enough. And when you only teach the science, it's like a doctor who is only giving you the test results, but then not giving you the information or the tools to repair and heal. So this is where bridging the disciplines of humanities, arts, and STEM together is necessary and is helpful for that repair and care that's required to usher in the systemic changes that are really what's needed to address both the climate crisis and issues of systemic inequality and injustice. And so first, I want to start with defining and talking about what is climate justice. And there's lots of ways to think about climate justice. I'm going to share one that comes from Ravi Conver's 2015 essay, Education for Climate Justice, and that Sarah Stapleton uses in her 2018 paper on intra-generational climate injustice in Bangladesh. And these two papers they define inter versus intra-generational climate justice. Intergenerational climate justice is illustrated by the photo of my children. They're standing to the right, they're on the right side in the image of their grandma, and it refers to the impact of one generation on another. So for instance, the impact of each generation's resource use on future generations who are not yet here, and do not yet have a voice. Whereas intra-generational climate justice refers to the impacts within a generation. So everyone, all of us that are living today, we all play a role in intra-generational climate justice. And for instance, in a 2019 Nature article, it shows that the richest 0.54%, that's just 42 million people, their lifestyle emissions from flying, driving, their big homes and consumption are greater than the poorest half of global population, which is about, right, we're over 3.6 billion people now. And the image that I created on the right, this shows kind of various wedges that represent things like education, gender, race, ability, employment, food, nutrition, and you could even add other wedges, right? Healthcare, housing. And these are the things that impact a person or a community's ability to contend with climate impacts that are happening right now, right? These are the intra-generational climate impacts. And because of historical oppression and colonization from rich countries, rich peoples, those most affected by intra-generational climate justice today are people in the global South and communities of color, particularly Indigenous, Black, and Latinx living in rich countries. And then to further illustrate this, here's an example of intra-generational climate justice through air pollution and particulate matter. So you can see the boulder that the person or the community is pushing on in this case, that climate impact is the climate exacerbated PM 2.5. And we have cases where the PM 2.5 is caused by the burning and extraction of fossil fuels, and also that we've seen locally in climate exacerbated West Coast fires and smoke, both of which produce this particulate matter pollution. And in the case of fossil fuel burning, it's now understood, thanks to a Harvard study and more recent studies, that fossil fuel burning is responsible for 1 in 5 deaths worldwide, which it accounts for over 900 deaths every day in the US alone. And this is according to a Harvard research that came out recently. And a local example in Seattle is summertime smoke. So a person or a community's ability to deal with the particulate matter, that PM 2.5 air pollution, it's represented by the boulder, as I said, and then it depends on many factors that are illustrated in the wedges. So for my family, those wedges are relatively narrow because I have the means to be able to close up our home, to purchase expensive HEPA filters, and I'm an atmospheric chemist, so I even have, like right next to me, I have a carbon dioxide monitor. And so these are relatively narrow for my family, even though maybe in terms of health, I have family members with asthma. Whereas maybe one of my students who lives in an apartment might not have the same control over their home air quality. And if they're not working as a student, they might not be able to afford that $250 flow vent inhaler that I have to buy for my child for their asthma. And this also shows where the benefits of community engagement can be seen. So in Seattle, a BIPOC-led community organization called Got Green set up a trading space for air filters and box fans last year. And you can see that this is their Instagram post. And in this way, community engagement, that civic engagement piece, it's a form of mutual aid that can help individuals or communities to kind of shrink or overcome some of these wedge disparities. And then the next question is, so why? Why incorporate climate justice across the curriculum into STEM classes, humanities, arts? Well, there's mounting evidence that in STEM disciplines in which Black, Indigenous, and Latinx groups and women are most underrepresented, that when you integrate an equity ethic or climate justice into these courses, it can promote student retention and success. And in fact, there were hints of this back in the 90s with the book Talking About Leaving when it first came out, as illustrated by this quote from a high-performing Black student who chose to leave an engineering major. Quote, "A big concern of a lot of Black students is we feel like we're being prepared to go into a white corporate America and it won't really help our community. We won't have the opportunity through our careers to give back to the community. Anything that we do for the community would be outside of our academic field, and that's a very serious concern." And then Ebony McGee's work, illustrated by her article with McGee and Bentley, suggests that when we incorporate this equity ethic into our teaching, as we're doing through our climate justice project, it helps to retain underrepresented students and women in STEM. And we know that concerns about climate change and its economic impact are also moving their way into the workplace, as you can see from this highlighted example in a job description for the Federal Reserve Bank, where they're looking for an applicant with experience in, quote, climate economics. And then, in terms of the equity ethic, when it's included as described in Dr. Ebony McGee's work, and this is her latest book, we see retention of students in STEM. And this is an email excerpt from a Black student at North Seattle College from a chemistry class that illustrates the benefits of including an equity ethic. The student says, quote, "Whenever you tell us information," hold on a sec, whoops, sorry, go back. "Whenever you tell us information on the current environment, I would always pass it along to my friends and family. I truly appreciate you for waking me up regarding the environmental crisis we're in. Even being a STEM student, I wasn't aware as much as I should, and I can only imagine how other people are deprived of the knowledge and scary situation we are in terms of our climate. I've been accepted to the UW chemical engineering program and will start this spring. I can't wait to actually be a part of the problem-solving community and hopefully come up with solutions to combat the climate crisis." So this student's email illustrates not just STEM retention and success, but also civic and community engagement in her sharing what she learned with her friends and family. So talking about climate, it's a form of civic and community engagement, and it's part of what's needed to shift culture to address the climate crisis. And we also know that our students and Americans in general are starting to care more about climate change. This is a graphic from Yale Program on Climate Change Communication and George Mason University, and they've been following Americans' concerns about global warming. And today, well over half of Americans are concerned and or alarmed about global warming. And the most recent polls show that that were conducted shows that both Black and Hispanic Americans are much more concerned and alarmed about climate change than white Americans. These are many of our students. And it's also interesting to note the sex-based differences. So this information tells us a story that BIPOC communities are more concerned, likely because of the disproportionate impact that climate change is and will have on BIPOC communities. And our students, they care about global warming and they want to know more than just the facts. So next I'm going to share some of the student voices on climate justice and equity. So the first is Aji Piper. He's 20 years old. He's a Seattle climate activist. And this is part of his congressional testimony that he gave before Congress. Quote, "I'm not a lawyer nor a climate scientist. I know from studying climate science and living with the consequences of climate change today that my health, my community, and my future, and that of my generation is at stake." Next is Ugandan climate justice activist Vanessa Nakate. "We cannot achieve climate justice without racial justice." This is Jamie Margolin, 19-year-old Seattle climate justice and LGBTQ activist, and she's also an author. Quote, "I go to bed with wishful dreams of that beautiful near future post-climate change world, and every day I wake up and work to make it happen. You are one of the people alive today who has the power to shape life on Earth. So what are you going to do with that? And then finally, this is Shia Bastida. She's a 19-year-old Fridays for Future climate justice activist. And she spoke at the recent, just a few days ago at Biden's climate summit. And this really resonates for me as an educator. She said, quote, "We demand comprehensive, non-Eurocentric and intersectional climate education, including literacy on climate justice, environmental racism, ancestral and indigenous wisdom, historical movements, disability justice, green careers, and sustainable living." And teaching in this context, what Shia was bringing up, a context of climate justice, it's more than just teaching the facts and the science. It means teaching using a systems thinking approach that connects issues that our students care about, right? That equity ethic, things in the real world with the tools and skills that are needed to address the problems they're learning about. And for some of them, they're facing today, right? Such as the wildfire smoke that we're seeing, or flooding in other parts. And so we do this through the Climate Justice Project by including not just the climate change and the climate justice, but also civic and or community engagement into our curriculum, that responsibility to take action. And we do this through our teachers, through our professors, through our instructors. Here's a flyer and post advertising the climate justice workshops and institutes that I've recently facilitated, one at University of Washington this past winter quarter, and then the other that I do regularly at North Seattle College. So this workshop is based on the initial work of the curriculum for the bioregion and the climate justice workshops that were initially developed and run by my collaborator, Dr. Sonia Doucette at Bellevue College. And you'll notice there's a $700 stipend for faculty to do this work at my college, and University of Washington also paid their faculty to do this work. It's really important to pay our faculty, especially underpaid and overworked adjunct, part-time, community college faculty, for their time and for doing this work. The workshop had 4 meeting days of about 1.5 to 2 hours each, and took place with 2 weeks between each meeting day. And this spacing allowed time for the faculty to reflect on their readings, to do discussions, and to design their curriculum. And then here is a list of the climate justice integrated lessons that UW faculty designed last quarter. And I want to point out one in particular, the one that's highlighted in purple, it's in a class on global warming, and the assignment's called Climate Grief and Anxiety, Awareness, Acknowledgement, and Taking Action. This particular assignment was multifaceted in the ways that it helps the students in this class to face the hard truths that they're learning about climate impacts and the forecasts. And it acknowledges the emotions that can come up in learning these hard facts. The assignment is a mix of writing, discussion, and reflection that empowers the students to talk about what they're learning in class with people in their lives that they usually wouldn't talk climate with, and then to reflect on these conversations in written reflections, and then also in small groups, such as breakout rooms or around a small table with fellow students. So I was really impressed with that particular assignment. And there's all of the assignments are fantastic that these faculty have created. And then here's the list of curriculum and campus activities created at North Seattle College for disciplines including English, ESL, statistics, physics, chemistry. I'm really intentional to make sure that STEM and humanities faculty and arts faculty, they're all in the same room to learn from each other. In science, we're taught to present just the science, but like I said before, that's like a doctor just giving you test results and failing to give you information to repair and heal. And STEM faculty, I find, and Sonia finds through our workshops, really benefit from working alongside the humanities and the arts faculty, who are often already comfortable including equity and justice examples in their classes. And since this workshop ran, I estimate, and the faculty estimate, that over 200 students just from this North Seattle workshop this past summer have encountered a climate justice lesson in their class, or at a school event, such as the event of on Indigenous Peoples Day that Christy Santos, our Associate Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and our ESL instructor, Carly Ikebara, created at North Seattle College. And next, I want to walk you through quickly what one of these climate justice integrated lessons looks like, and how I facilitate faculty creating their assignments. So I want to try to do this in about 3 minutes so we have some time for Q&A. The first thing that faculty do is they come up with a big idea and the concepts specific to their class. So I teach general chemistry, and some of the main concepts are states of matter, stoichiometry, elements, and such. And they're just thinking about their class. They're not yet thinking about how to connect that with climate justice or civic engagement. And then here's an example from Carly's class for her ESL. And they're just the main skills. The next step for the faculty, once they've done this in the workshop and they're working together to do this, is to come up with a climate justice idea that they want to connect to the big ideas in their classes. And each faculty member gets a copy of Drawdown, and they go through, and we also have a list of these depending on how we're doing this in person or if online, or they have a stack of cards that they choose from. And so they pick a climate justice idea. And then the next thing that they do is they pick a civic or community engagement idea or activity that the students are going to do, right? Those tools that they're going to need. And so here's some examples of how this is connected together, right? The big idea, whatever that skill or concept. So this is kind of our organizer that we've been using to do this online. When we do it in person, it looks a little different. Have them put in their name, their class, the lesson title, what is the climate justice issue that they're going to incorporate, and then what is the assignment that they're going to create, and then the civic engagement piece or activity that they're going to do. And so for my class, one of the assignments that I created was around natural gas, and the chemistry concepts included things like balancing equations, states of matter, oxidation numbers. So these were kind of the big ideas. And then the climate justice, the climate justice aspects that I was bringing in were things like childhood asthma, right? We now know that there's a significant elevated risk of asthma for children who live in homes with gas stoves. Indoor air quality, when there's gas stoves or gas appliances, can be higher than what the EPA allows for even outdoor air pollution. And then also connecting it with indigenous lands through watching videos such as Yahao or Ancestral Waters. These are local impacts of pipelines or fossil fuel infrastructure here in the Pacific Northwest. And then for the civic engagement piece for my students, they discuss what they learned with a friend or a family member. They answer questions about how an individual versus a community can reduce pediatric asthma, things like that. And then this is what the organizer looks like for my class. So chemistry 161, right? Indoor air quality, stoichiometry, redox for the big ideas, and then the lesson itself, and then that civic engagement piece. And that civic engagement piece can be lots of different things. It can be creating Twitter posts, right? Or commenting on YouTube, or creating a haiku. One of the University of Washington faculty had their students create haikus from the IPCC report. And then finally, I want to share that I'm excited to announce that Sonia and I have a new National Science Foundation IUSE grant. IUSE stands for Improving Undergraduate STEM Education, to continue this work. And I think our grant focus is pretty well self-explanatory from the title of our grant, which is Climate Justice in Undergraduate STEM incorporating civic engagement. And with that, I want to leave time for questions. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing.
Wonderful. We do have a couple of questions in our Q&A. For anybody who hasn't asked their question yet, if you go to the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen, then we can take your questions as well. So the first one was, which faculty or department led the development of the Climate Grief and Anxiety course?
I believe that was in atmospheric sciences, in their atmospheric sciences 111 course at University of Washington. And I believe that that professor, they're either teaching it this quarter or it's going to be next quarter that they're implementing that. And they tested it while they were creating that lesson. And it sounded like it went really well. They had them reflect on what they were learning. This was one of the most fascinating things I loved about this was they said, okay, students, take 15 minutes to reflect on what you've been learning and either write about it, go for a walk and think about it, or draw or do some artwork. And some of the students were turning in artwork that clearly they had spent more than 15 minutes on. Like you could tell it was just these beautiful paintings or sketches of nature to reflect on what they're learning.
Wonderful. Our next question, how do we get funding to put on a workshop like this for our campus? At UC San Diego, our efforts to put on workshops for med school and undergraduate instructors have been limited to professors who got out of their own way to acquire funding through small internal grant programs to develop new or redevelop their courses to include climate justice. There's interest from many faculty, but they don't feel like they have the time or the funding to do so.
Yeah, that is such an important key part is paying faculty, pay the facilitators. I get paid to do these workshops and pay the faculty to do this work. It is beyond the scope of what their work, particularly if they're part-time or they're community college faculty, right? I mean, as a community college faculty, I make less than my kid's first grade teacher in Seattle Public Schools. We don't make enough. So you got to pay us for the work that you want us to do. The way that we were able to get funding at Bellevue College, it's coming from the provost office. At my college, it's coming from the vice president of instruction's office. And so it's coming from all different places. At University of Washington, it came from the program on the environment. So it's that, or the College of the Environment, it's that umbrella that includes oceanography, atmospheric sciences, forestry, ESS, all of those. And it takes some legwork to seek that funding, absolutely. But I think it's really important and critical to because then the faculty, right, that they're getting paid for their work, which they should be.
All right, if anybody else has questions, we have time for maybe one more. If you want to use that Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, we'd love to hear from you. All right, we got some great thank yous in the chat box as
Yeah.
well.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, we just have 1 minute left. So, Dr. Price, is there any closing comments that you'd like to leave us with today?
Go out and talk climate and hopefully get this kind of work started at your institution. Sonia and I are very open about sharing our curriculum for these workshops. Sonia right now, this next year, she's going to be training some of her faculty. They've been at it for about 1.5 years longer than my faculty have. So she's starting to train faculty to actually run these workshops. So let's get it out there. And thank you, everyone. And thank you, Katie.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for presenting